Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Real-Time Insights, Real Results, Drive Performance with Compass Data. Really glad that you're all here today. See a lot of familiar names and faces on the webinar today. We would ask today that if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand or just interrupt and say, hey, I have a quick question. And we'll make sure we get to that question. If we do have leftover questions at the end that we don't get to, we will make sure to send out the answers to those questions after the webinar. We will also be sending out a survey after the webinar that will come out tomorrow following up. And we just ask you to return that information. It'd be great. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Steve McDonald, who will introduce himself, and then turn it over to Jana. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Welcome, everybody. Great. We have so many people showing up for this. We're excited to go through our presentation and answer questions that we have. So again, Steve McDonald, I'm the managing partner of Abdo. And Compass has been a super fun project for us that we've really loved bringing out to our industry. So with that, I'll introduce or let Jana Cinnamon introduce herself.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yes, I am a partner and the Chief Operating Officer at Abdo. I also currently serve as the chair of the CPA Firm Management Association, so I know I'm seeing a number of familiar names and faces from that, and hope to see some of you in Savannah next month. But yes, Steve said Compass has been a really valuable tool for us as a firm, and a few years ago, we really worked to develop this tool to help us lead and manage our practice. And that prompted us to see the difference that it could make within our firm and extend it to offering it to other firms. But I'll say what we're going to talk through today is actually the types of conversations and information that we've had in our own firm. We meet with our partners and managers, and we talk about how to use Compass to lead and manage projects and people and make us more effective. And so the conversations we've had here internally, we also see that as being valuable for you in your firms as you're looking to use Compass more fully and to have some of those right conversations within your firms. So first of all, I want to get us started as we think about data. One of the things that I think we sometimes get a little skittish about is having conversations about how people are doing, their numbers, their metrics. But I want us to remember, if you take a big step back, recognize that we have been conditioned for years to wonder, how am I doing? How do I measure up? This goes back to our early childhood. We knew how we were doing by getting our report card. That was something that we looked to see. Hey, did I get that A that I wanted to get? We knew that we wanted to make sure our temperature when we went to the nurse's office was 98.6 degrees. We played sports and we knew what the scoring system was, and we wanted to see how are we doing in the game. Credit scores, all of these things, we all have a human need or desire to understand, how am I doing? We've been conditioned to do this. But yet sometimes I find firm leaders are hesitant to talk about the numbers. But recognize, I want to give you that kind of peace of mind to say, we want it. People want to know how they're doing. But where I think we struggle with this is in how to have the conversations about data. Oftentimes what I'll hear, I come with a human resources background, is we see that somebody's not living up to our expectations. They're not meeting our performance expectations. And so we engage in a conversation with them and we say, hey, you're not meeting our expectations. And now I'm explaining to you what those expectations are. Now let's work on improving it. But the reality is that's a really terrible order to go in. It doesn't feel good to the person to hear, hey, you're not doing well, when they didn't actually even understand what good looked like in the first place. So as leaders, first and foremost, we have to make sure we're communicating expectations on the front end. We need to let people know what we expect of them, what good looks like, what is that right temperature we want them to be at. If we start by communicating that, if we lead with that, it gets much easier to partner with them to make sure that they're staying on track with those expectations. It's way better to manage and keep people on track than just trying to manage once they're off track. Now, sometimes people do get off track, but if you've set the expectation in the first place, you've been working with them along the way, and then if they're really not meeting those expectations, you can really know that it wasn't because it was an unspoken expectation, but maybe it was because more training is needed, or maybe they're just not the right fit for the job. I will say, working at Abdo for a number of years, as well as talking with a lot of other firms and other industries even, pretty consistent feedback that is heard from new hires when you're checking in with them at 60 days or 90 days or 6 months are those new hires saying, I don't know how I'm doing. I'm not really sure if I'm meeting expectations. New hires come into an organization and they want to be successful, and they're have this anxiety about, hey, am I really living up to these expectations? And so that is something we need to be thinking about as we're bringing people into the firm, of making sure that we're clear from the beginning what success looks like. So if you have anybody reporting to you, you have anybody that you are responsible for, it is the expectation as a leader within your firm to be communicating those performance expectations. Not only communicating them on the front end, but also regularly providing feedback along the way, letting them know if they're on track or off track. It's way easier to let somebody know if they're slightly off track and getting them back on course than when somebody's gotten way off track and trying to course correct. It is also your responsibility to help them learn how to use and understand Compass. You may have people who are newer to public accounting and don't understand what the metrics mean. You may have somebody who has worked in public accounting a long time, but they don't necessarily understand why those numbers matter. So you want to make sure that they understand those foundational elements, as well as how to navigate within Compass, because it is a tool at their disposal that they can use to keep track of how they're doing. Again, people want to know, how am I doing? Another best practice for you as a leader of people is to make sure that you have a regular cadence of when you're reviewing this information with your people. A mistake I sometimes see people making is that they tell them what the expectations are, and then they don't revisit it until they're off track. And it feels really gross to an employee when they suddenly have you pull up the dashboard and start looking at the numbers. But if they're used to you regularly looking at the numbers with them, it feels natural. It feels a part of work. It feels part of what they're used to. And so make sure that you've got a regular process to be looking at the information with your people. Don't just look at it when it's off track. So at our firm, we have our partners and managers meet with their direct reports on a weekly basis. We tell them you don't necessarily need to be looking at that in your one-on-ones every week, but on a monthly basis would be a really good practice to just have that regular practice of looking at how they're doing. Now, I mentioned, setting the stage for people when they come into the firm, making sure you communicate on the front end what the expectations are. But I know for the vast majority of you, the number of people in your firm are not new hires. They're people who've been there for a long time. And so it can feel really hard to start having conversations about the data when you maybe haven't been having those conversations. Or it may be hard to introduce Compass to them if, again, they've been working there for 5-10 years and they haven't had a tool to be looking at their performance. I hear the hesitation of people feeling like, well, I don't want to come across as a micromanager, that I'm really putting the thumb down on them. I'm fearful that they're going to leave. Well, what I recommend in this instance is you aren't, without an ability to bring this up in conversation. Don't feel like you can't do it if somebody's worked with you for years. Instead, look for a good natural time when you can kind of do a reset. We all have these naturally within our business. It may be right after busy season. It might be before the next busy season rolls around. It may be at the start of the new year. It might be right after you do a performance review. Find that natural time for a reset. In that conversation, then, you have the opportunity to show your care for the employee and your desire to partner with them to see them be successful. Hopefully, you have an employee population like ours, they're wanting to grow and improve. They're wanting to bring their best every day. And so you can enter that conversation in a really great way by saying, hey, we're gearing up for this next busy season. I really want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can do to help you have the best season yet. Again, I want to make you have a really good experience here working at Abdo or working at your firm and knowing that you're contributing and adding value to our clients. So let's talk about what a successful season would look like and how I can best help you with that. And that's a really good entry point for talking about data and how you can be monitoring how they're doing. So don't wait for just the new hires to come in to start this process. You can do this with your existing hires as well. I also want to briefly talk about some traps when it comes to data. First of all, employees, we are monitoring their performance through metrics, right? We are looking at utilization, realization, turnaround times, things like this. We are monitoring this, but we have to remember data is not everything about an employee's performance. There are things that you can't capture well in numbers. Things like how do they do with coaching and mentoring staff? Do they raise their hand to help people? Are they really good at talking with clients and explaining things? Remember that data is not everything about an employee's performance, and make sure that you're talking about those other things as well, recognizing that, observing and commenting on it. I also will say data is not the whole story in terms of a number is a number. There's more that backs that up. You could say, hey, I looked at this employee's, time entered last week. They only worked 40 hours, but this other coworker worked 40 hours. That coworker worked harder. They had a harder week because they worked 60 hours. Well, not necessarily, right? What type of work did they do? Did they have a really difficult client interaction? Was there really complexity within those 40 hours? There's a lot more to it. So don't necessarily take the number as the full story. And that's where I'll say too, don't jump to conclusions about the data. Really get curious more so. So again, maybe you see that somebody's productivity has dipped. Jumping to a conclusion would be, well, they're lazy, they're not motivated, they don't want to grow, they don't want to develop. That's jumping to a conclusion. Instead of doing that, if you see that somebody's productivity has dipped, you should get curious to say, why has it dipped? Don't make up the story in your head about why that's happening. Instead, ask questions. It may not be that they're not motivated or driven. It may be because they're dealing with some challenges at home. So again, get curious. And again, I've emphasized this point before, but a trap is certainly talking about the numbers, talking about the metrics only when they're off track. That, again, does not feel good to the employee. It turns them off. It puts up their defenses. If you build a regular habit about talking about the data, talking about the results, it leads to much more success in people embracing it and welcoming the feedback to help them get better. When it comes to all of this information, I want to share an example of how it has occurred sometimes in our firm, of where we look at the data and again, we maybe kind of just jump to conclusions or we address it incorrectly with our employees. So this is a feedback basic type of thing. Again, don't just assume that somebody is doing something with ill intent or kind of attack them with your questioning. So an example of what not to do is saying, hey, I looked at Compass and I saw that you had 30 hours of miscellaneous time coded last week. What were you doing? Immediately, somebody is going to feel defensive. They're not going to feel great about that conversation. So you don't want to approach it in that way. Again, instead, when you want to get into having a feedback type of conversation, you have to start by seeking to understand. If somebody feels understood, they're going to be much more open to your feedback about their performance. So instead of just saying, hey, what were you doing? Say, hey, tell me about your week last week. What were you working on? Yes, you maybe already looked at where their time was coded, but let them articulate about what their week looked like. So the employee may say, oh, I was doing some client setup in our new application, XYZ application, and that was taking a lot of my time. I can ask some further questions. Oh, is that how you spent most of your week? Well, yeah, that was how I spent quite a bit of it. Dig further. Well, tell me more about that. I'm surprised, I didn't realize it would be something that would take that long. What all is entailed with getting a client set up in that application? So then once you're doing that, you're much more open to having a real conversation, and that allows you to help them problem solve if they're off track and that's really not how they should be spending their time. You can course correct, you can re-clarify expectations. But what I really like to emphasize here is this gives you an opportunity to reflect on yourself. What could I have done differently? You know that your employee maybe shouldn't have spent 30 hours of miscellaneous time doing something. Instead of saying blaming the employee for doing that, you should be reflecting on what could I have done on the front end to make sure that that didn't happen? And now how can I learn from that and apply that going forward so that we avoid it in the future? I want to share with you a quote that was shared with our firm from Alex Dorr. He's from Reality Based Leadership, and he came in and he spoke with our firm, and he's been at a number of various CPA firm conferences. But he shared this comment. He said, if you have drama in your organization, you either inherited it, hired it, enable it, or you are it. So when we think about data, I will say it can be used for good or it can be used for drama. And again, I think this is why sometimes people get hesitant to talk about the data or bring it up. But remember that it is your responsibility at the end of the day. And so when I think about data for good or data for drama, I see it really in two ways. On the best side of data, it is used to prompt action to help you improve yourself or help improve the team. If you are using the data to do that, you are on the right side of things. If it is prompting you to action to help you guide or coach others, you are on the right side of data. I will say action is the key with data. If you're just looking at it and saying it's interesting, that's not where the real value comes from. Action is the key. On the flip side of it, if data is really drama, where you're seeing it happen is people who spend time just looking at the data to prove their own worth. Look at how hard I work. Look at how much more I work than other people. Or to compare the value you bring to somebody else. That's drama. That's not the best of data. If you're using it to be critical of others, look at how little they worked this tax season. Look at, they didn't put in the 70-hour work week that I put in. That's being critical of others. Or talking about others, right? Did you see in Compass that, so-and-so only did this much work last week? Or again, jumping to conclusions. They're lazy, they're not working hard, they're not capable, they're not competent. That's data for drama. Again, data for good is the things that are prompting you to action to make things better for yourself, your department, or the firm. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve here to talk about how can we really use Compass to manage our people and manage our projects, ultimately making our employee experience and our client experience more effective. Steve?
All right, thank you. I'm going to give really two straightforward examples that really kind of helped us delve into the data for good, data for evil. We've experienced both in the firm. As Janice said, there can be a lot of comparison, contrast, those kind of things. And it really does come down to leadership in the firm on what's emphasized and what's important. I think I've learned a lot over the last year with a lot of what Jana had said is how to enter these conversations, because data is going to show you opportunity wherever you're looking. So again, I'm going to look at two simple things, the productivity and then client project and sort of real life situations that we've had over the last year or so. And hopefully that's helpful. So I'll start here on the employee tab, and I've filtered it for this busy season, and I'm focused on our associate level. And again, I understand all of us have different categories and different groups here, but these would be our new hires. These would be the first through third year people in our business tax department. And we've gotten to where we don't spend a ton of time on this because there's a lot of drama in the total hours. But where I've seen real opportunity from a leadership perspective is understanding how are we keeping people busy. When we think about our associates and our seniors, they're the workhorses in our firm. I think it's a real missed opportunity if we aren't conscious of having their plate full. It's a development thing. I think one of the biggest enemies we run into is people getting bored, which is hard to believe during busy season that could happen. But often they can fly under the radar if somebody isn't paying attention to it. So we really coached our partners and managers over the last year to be paying attention to this, more from the development side. And the problem that I want to see solved is August, September, October. So that's been miserable for us the last 3 or 4 years. And we've done a number of things internally in the firm to make that better. And we feel like we made real progress this year. And a big part of that was really being intentional with the newer people that we brought on, getting them involved, getting them engaged. I had meetings with our people that have been in the firm for 3 years. I met with 8 or 10 people this year. And what I wanted to hear is that they felt like they were getting meaningful client contact. They felt like they were getting new projects, those kind of things. And I was really happy to hear that our partners took it seriously last year when we talked about it. But when it comes down to, okay, we wanted to get them more involved. We wanted to be more proactive with due dates. We wanted to communicate better with our clients. Those were some of the high level things that we said we wanted to do this busy season. And instead of what we experienced last year was our associates were, to say they were ignored isn't fair, but to say they weren't top of mind as we planned out the year is probably more accurate. That starts right away in January, getting them involved, getting them meaningful client contact. So that something that we review, I look at it probably every 2 weeks, but I expect our leaders in our departments to be looking at that about that same time frame, is productivity. And so in the productivity page, the other thing, as I'm kind of going through this, if you haven't got used to some of the drill throughs and expansion of views and those things, I find it really helpful to be using that. So here's just the productivity page. And what stands out to me right away, this is this tax season. So January 1st through April 15th. Prior year is the same period. The effective rate and the realization also are here. Not happy realization went way down, but I know that we did a merger and we allocated a lot of time to our associates to help get that, to help set up. And that's probably the biggest cause of this productivity decline. But what I'm really happy about is the increase in productivity for our associate level from last year to this year. And you can see it's notable in a number of people, going up 13 percentage points, 23 percentage points, about the same, up 6, up 25%, 25 percentage points. That's intentional. And that's from having this data in front of our leaders and leaders as a team. So not just one person, but our tax partners all pay attention to this information. And if you're responsible for a department where you have a number of employees in there, even if they don't directly report to you, it's an opportunity for teamwork and to understand and to ask questions about availability and those things. It's really helped us work together better as a team by knowing everything that's in there, not just being siloed and focused on the people that I have direct responsibility for. So since last year, this was an area of focus. We paid more attention to this. We had discussion about that in leadership meetings, in tax department meetings. Hey, is this person getting work? Why are they so much less than everybody else? And then we had conversation about that, and then more direct conversation with her direct manager. And that's going to lead to an awareness that just wasn't there before. The other thing, so with our associates, we would expect at least 70% productivity during this time of year. That's a target. And so we have a high to low, but being able to drill through is another important part of using this data. You know, like Janice said, you can look at this and it's interesting, but how do you get to something that helps you understand more about what's going on? Being able to use the drill through features. So I'm right clicking and drilling through to the employee time tree. And this view has all of the various codes. So what I'd already set this up. So we have a delineation between billable, non-billable, and from non-billable, we have all of the service codes that are here. And again, knowing that this utilization is a bit less than what my expectation would be, I'm able to look at a couple of things. And again, 60% isn't on the horrible end. That's on the area we need to focus and understand what's there and work to improve that. Stands out to me, 107 hours of CPE. I would want to understand more about what's in that number. So clicking and highlighting that. Business tax training, we put a lot of effort into onboarding and bringing people on. Okay, there was many days here that were just 100% training related. Okay, that all makes sense. One thing we've seen in the last year or two is potential billable hours hidden in miscellaneous. And I think this again is a lot of what Jana talked about establishing expectations. I think there's a big variety of how people are managed through just where they're coding their time. And it's not just about cranking billable hours, but I think we have missed opportunities where we did things that we need to get paid for. This affects how we set next year's prices. This affects performance. You know, if billable hours, real time that was valuable to the client is stashed away in the miscellaneous category, we are missing an opportunity there. So in the highlighted the miscellaneous category, and I think I'd looked through a few of this before. So when I can filter through this easily, I see one that stands out for me: preparing for Tailwind next steps, checking spreadsheet. Well, I know Tailwind's one of our biggest clients, and that is part of working on the client. I'm going to enter that conversation the way Jana said. Tell me about that, what you're working on last week. You're working on Tailwind, and then you can get into some of the detail about what was the thought process you had when you were coding time. I think those are meaningful conversations that you can have with your employees. So again, this is a really simple example, but something that I think is really important to do on an ongoing basis. Again, not just focusing on this percentage is this, but being able to ask questions, because it could go the other way. If somebody's 95% chargeable, is that what we want to? Well, I'd say that's probably pretty good, but there could be other things too. It could be a work allocation. Are they working on more than they should? Are they involving other people in the team? So you can take it both ways, regardless of what the number is. So something to think about there. The other example that I want to go through, and I show this in a lot of demos, but this is another area where we've gotten managers a lot more involved in understanding what's going on and planning work for a client. So what I've done here is highlighted 2 years worth of information. We start planning our audits usually in November and December prior to doing field work. So that's why I have this set to November 1st of 22 through current. What I'm getting here is 2 years worth of information. So I have our 22 audit and our 23 audit. I've filtered this for a particular client. If you think about planning, you're not going to take or filter everything at one time. You're probably going to go just to a particular client. And then we do a number of projects with this client. So I just wanted to grab the audit, but we have a few other things that we do for them. Again, I understand a lot of you may have different ways that you've organized your information. Ours is that we have a project for audit, and then we have a year for the year we're working on it. So when we got done with the audit last year, we had very poor client service. We were told that by the client, and we created the problem, not necessarily the client. And it really was lack of follow through on what we had started. So I'm clicking through to the hours analysis. Let me go back, so I need to make it more clear. So 22, I want to look at these 265 hours. What happened? What went off? So I'm right clicking and drilling through to the hours analysis. And I get a pretty good lay of the land, who worked on it, total hours, where did our time fall? I have expectations for the amount of time we spend on reporting, amount of time we'd spend on planning. You know, of a job that's 260 hours, I'd expect 15 to 20 hours of planning. It was about there. Reporting, I'd expect 20 to 30. We went over, and then we had a lot of field work. And when we went through and analyzed this, what I like to do is that we have the audit team sitting in the room, and I like to bring this up and say, okay, tell me what's happening here. We have a lot of data points that give clues to what was going on. I think it's been a really good opportunity for, again, our associates and our seniors to really start thinking about big picture. What are we trying to do? I mean, I tee it up a little bit stronger than that, but basically somebody tell me what went well, what didn't go well here. And usually it's dead silence. So I'm counting on our manager, and I'll certainly fill in at that point. But what was good? Well, the planning was right in line. What wasn't? The job drug on for a very long time. We just didn't finish what happened. And okay, the key thing is, how are we going to, all of this is good information, but then what do you do about it? And because we timed it with finishing this job and planning for the next one, everybody on the team knew what our expectations were. We knew that we had to finish the field work in the field. We had to review that work as soon as it was done. And we needed to draft the report timely. So everybody is on the same page, and we can see notable improvement going into this year. Job's still a bit in process, but we'll probably finish at about 175 hours. So we knocked 100 hours off that job, and I would credit that to the discussion that we had about how things went off track last year. So what happens? Okay, the senior recognizes that. They call the client to get a more exact client request list. The manager on the job knows that reviewing timely is important, and they review more timely. And then reporting knows, I can't just pick up and put down this job. I need to finish it because management stressed me. It's important for me to get this done, not to let it hang out there. But we wrap that all up in the client experience. That's kind of the lead part of this, because this was an awesome opportunity, because it was really a crappy client experience. And being able to name that and talk about how the client felt because of what we did was impactful to the team. So That's I think a good example of taking information, yesterday's news, building it into how we going to operate tomorrow. So I think those two examples are like real life examples of how we've used Compass to help improve performance, behavior, all those things in a positive way. Because again, I think Jana circled the I in the one slide that she had there. To me, that's the most important thing, is too often we blame lazy staff person, doesn't know what they're doing. I look at that as our responsibility, that we have to own that. When people have struggles or troubles, this helps identify that. I need to step in. I talk about removing obstacles is really a job of a partner and manager. And when we see staff struggling or not getting the work that they needed, this is something that we have responsibility to do. So again, two examples. I know that there's so many things in here where we go, but these have been very impactful. And I think they lead to other things. Learning the drill throughs, using these kind of things will make a big difference in your experience.
Thank you, Steve. While you're still sharing your screen here for a moment, I just want to mention, so I will share my background. Again, I said I come from a human resources background. I spent time in learning and development. And so I spent time in adult learning. How do adults learn? And you've maybe heard about learning styles, right? Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner? And the great majority of adult learners learn best visually, right? That's where it's like, again, sitting here and watching Steve, work through Compass, you're learning from that because you're getting to see him use that. In the same way, when it comes to setting expectations with our employees, they're visual in understanding expectations too. So rather than just saying, hey, I want your productivity to be this, or here's what a good project looks like, being able to show them is impactful, right? So again, it's what does success look like? When I take myself back to school and I had to write an essay, I was given a grading rubric, right? It said, hey, you need to have a title page and you need to have, an intro paragraph and a conclusion paragraph. And I knew I could get the points for it. That was a grading rubric. At the same point, our staff now are doing work. They're doing a tax return or an audit or whatever they're doing, and they need to know what success looks like. And I think giving them that visual, Steve, that hours analysis, show them what good looks like, right? Show them an example of what a good audit looks like and explain, walk through, here's what made it good. Hey, we did planning. Hey, we wrapped things up in the field. Hey, we got it turned around within this time frame. When they can get a visual of what good looks like, that really makes a difference in helping them understand their expectations. Another view that we didn't look at, Steve, would just be at our firm, we give our employees access. And so they have their own employee view. So when we showed you the employee tab, that was for us as management looking at it. But as an employee, they're not going to be looking at how their peers are doing. They're going to just be looking at their own results. And so an employee themselves can come in and see their own information. And so again, putting this in front of them to help them see what good looks like can be really helpful, even from the year standpoint, to say, okay, we are going to expect, we've budgeted for you to have some higher productivity during these months, or here's how many hours we'd be expecting at certain times of the year. Again, showing them those visuals, helping them see on track, off track, above expectations, below expectations. Visuals are really powerful. And I think that that's one of the great values of using Compass and really putting it in front of people, even, your leaders, to see those visuals is impactful. While we're still here, while Steve is still sharing his screen, I want to invite anybody, if you have any comments or questions or want clarification on anything, now is a great time if you want to put it into the chat, or you're certainly welcome to unmute yourself and ask any questions while we're here in the tool. All right, no brave souls unmuting themselves. You may still be typing into the chat. We are going to continue with the presentation. If those questions come in through the chat, we will get back to them. All right, so I'm going to pick it back up here to really kind of put a bow on top of this package of what Steve has just talked through here. And I want to really give some best practices about managing people and managing those projects. Okay, so when we talked about managing people, this is a bit of a recap here of what I said, is it's really how you start, right? Make sure on the front end you are communicating or reviewing the expectations. We like to communicate with our people things like budgeted hours expectations or turnaround expectations. Again, what you're monitoring as a firm, start with that. Also, explain to them the value of reviewing the data, right? It's not just to size them up and make them feel good, right? But it's also helping them feel accomplished, right? People not only want to know how they're doing, they want to feel good about the work that they're doing. And so sometimes reviewing those results, and when you have done a good job and you're on track or you're exceeding what the expectations were, reviewing that regularly feels good. People want to feel that. Also, it's a way of minimizing stressors, right? When you're regularly reviewing the information, you're talking about expectations, you are much more likely to proactively avoid issues and minimize some of those things that can cause pain for your people. Also, make sure, again, you are being consistent and regular in reviewing the data in your one-on-ones with your people, not random. So regular versus random. The more consistent you can be as a manager, the better experience that is for your employee in all facets of management. Also, equip your direct report to self-manage by making sure they know how to access and view Compass. Again, we encourage you to have this available to your people and make sure that they know that it's at their fingertips. Again, self-management is the best way forward, right? You want people to know what success is, to be able to monitor their progress, and how they're doing. And so equip them, empower them to use the tool. And then use that data to really develop your good coaching questions. Good management is being a good question asker. It's not just telling people things, it's asking the right questions. I really encourage you to ask good open-ended questions. Tell me what's happening here, but not the why. If you think about getting asked a question of why, immediately people put their defenses up. If you say, why did you do that? Why is that happening? Why? That's not a great coaching question. My favorite coaching question, my favorite way to start anything when I'm talking to employees is like, tell me about this. It feels so much better to be in that conversation versus kind of an accusatory question. And then remember, it's not only about the data. If all you're talking to about them is their data, their numbers, and you're not talking about things, those subjective things, how they engaged in the meeting, how they communicated with the client, how they helped somebody, those are things that matter too. Make sure that you're seeing the whole person. So I don't want you to avoid talking about data, but I also don't want you to have data be the only thing that you see about a person either. All right, then we talked about how to manage projects effectively, and so some key ideas for managing those projects. First of all, review the project budget up front. Make sure it makes sense, and make sure everybody who's involved in working on a project understands the details, understand the expectations. Again, I used that example of having a grading rubric to understand what success looked like when I was writing an essay in college. Same type of thing with your people. Explain on the front end, here's what our expectations are for this project. Here's the schedule. Here's how much time we plan to spend. Here's who's responsible for what. Make sure you're doing it on the front end. Again, that's how you set up success versus trying to manage to issues afterwards. Also recognize that success isn't just meeting a deadline. Again, I think we get too deadline driven in this industry where it's like, hey, we've got this due on, April 15th or whatnot. But if that is all that your employees think that success is, they're really missing an opportunity to lean into the client experience. So it's not just a deadline. Success is not just hitting a metric. We have seen examples of client projects that have had fantastic realization, fantastic metrics for the project, but at the end of the day, the client didn't have a good experience for one reason or another. So it's not just about the metric, it's about the whole story again. So remember, there's a lot that you want to communicate about what success looks like. So make sure you're setting expectations beyond the metrics and also about things like how we communicate with clients, our responsiveness, the clarity and the ways we communicate. All of those things are important to communicate as well. One of the things we use as an analogy quite a bit when we talk about client experience within our own teams is we use this analogy of a restaurant, and thinking about, hey, when you go and you dine at a restaurant, it is a basic expectation that you're going to get the right food delivered to your table and that it's going to be the appropriate temperature, right? Like that's a basic expectation. That doesn't mean that you had an awesome experience at the restaurant. That is just what you expect. And we talk about that with client experience at our firm. We expect that we're going to get the right information to our clients. It's going to be the right temperature, as in it's going to be accurate. It's going to be done well with a good quality, and we're going to meet the deadline. But that is just the basics of what a client experience is. That is not giving them an exceptional experience. And so make sure that, again, you want to make sure you are getting them their right food at the right table at the right time. Absolutely. But make sure you're also taking it a step further to enhance that client experience and provide some of those other touches that you're not going to capture in just metrics. At the end of the day, when we bring all of this together, we see Compass as a great way of managing the firm, managing the performance of what we're doing. But really, again, we can use data for drama or we can use data for good. We want to see using Compass to do three things. It should help improve the employee experience by, again, helping them see what success is and helping them be successful. Improving the client experience, making sure that we're giving our best to our clients, and ultimately seeing the firm performance improve. The better we are as a firm, the better we are for everybody. So that is our real objective with using Compass. I know that a question did come in, and so that's what we're going to do now here is pivot and start answering any questions that you have. So please put those into the chat. The first question that came up is, are there any plans for incorporating Access workflow data into Compass? So Steve, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yes, it's on the list. What we've run into is every firm uses it a little bit differently. We've modeled some things in XCM, which again, workflow and XCM are two different things, but we do see an opportunity there to build more functionality in Compass around that. It ends up being a whole different programming initiative. So right now we're studying that because I think as we build out Compass in the future, we want to be more of what's coming up next. So things like capacity planning, those are some of the vision of where we want to take this. Because again, being able to take a look at last year's information, using that to help understand capacity and scheduling and where things can go is a big opportunity. Scheduling, though, I'd say at the beginning, any of us that have tried scheduling software or doing anything like that, we're not going to build scheduling software. It seems like I have heard very few success stories in that, and software ends up being an answer where you really need people involved. And so we're not going to create something that is going to be this magic button that's going to solve scheduling problems. But with workflow, I think there is opportunity to build turnaround information. We are working on that internally in the firm and trying to figure out how that can benefit other firms. I'm a big believer in turnaround. I think it shows so much on client experience and how staff performance is. Something that's away from just the hours. Like we've talked about this before. We've had employees in the firm that have just knocked it out of the park in getting stuff done. And they worked 50 hours a week during busy season, but they were so valuable because they finished what they started. They hit every budget. They did a fantastic job. And I want to see us be able to measure that. So that's in the works of something that we are working on.
Yeah, I'll speak to that just a little further of, yes, Steve is always talking about turnaround and the value of monitoring that and making sure the work is getting done, the work is moving. One of the big conversations we've been having with our leadership, our partners, our managers, is understanding our role and our responsibilities. And one of the things that we talk about is it is our job as leaders to remove obstacles for people. Sometimes when we see that work is dragging out, it could be something like, well, the client's not responding. And that's maybe why it's sat out there for a while, is because we haven't heard back from the client. And a great example of removing an obstacle in that Steve has talked to many times is he'll have a staff person say, oh, I didn't hear, I've emailed the client 7 times. They haven't responded to me. And I'll say, hey, let's call them right now. And he'll have the staff with them, pick up the phone, call the client right then and there, get that responsiveness, keeps the work moving and removes that obstacle. And so I think that's a great way of thinking about, again, how we can be using the data for good is when we see something maybe dragging out, figuring out how can we insert ourselves to help remove any obstacles that our staff may be experiencing. Great. Other questions, I welcome you again to put them into the chat, or you're welcome to also unmute if you want to ask them out loud. We need background music, Steve. I think that's what we. You want to make a little Jeopardy noise here? All right, I will give it just another 30 seconds or so for anybody to enter any questions into the chat if you have them. I know at the beginning of the session, Don did talk about a survey that's going to be coming out as well. Do you want to talk a little bit, Don, about what you're going to be asking in the survey?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jenna. And first of all, thanks everybody for attending today. Really enjoyed it. And it was great to see so many of our clients participate today. Yes, we will be sending out a survey. And basically what's going to be asking is, just for some feedback on today's presentation. Also, what topics would you like to hear from us about in the future? What type of things that you would like to learn about, et cetera, as we continue to build Compass and gather feedback. We're also going to ask you what has been valuable that you've seen in Compass, and also to respond to a couple of new ideas we have. So that's what we'll be sending out.
Great. Well, speaking of ideas, one question did come in. Is there a cheat sheet to navigate around the app?
I don't think there's a cheat sheet to navigate. There are in the support tab, there are a lot of videos and learnings about how you can navigate through and what's available on each of the dashboards. So you might find some value there. Yeah, so I'd definitely spend some time in that link area. There are definitely some helpful tools out there. If you have some further ideas of what would be helpful, again, share that feedback in the survey.
And also what you're asking me to do too.
Yes, I did assign, this is management best practice is manage up, tell your boss what to do. I have asked Steve to compile something that does help outline for people in different roles within your firm. If you're a partner, if you're leading a practice area, if you're a manager, what are the types of reports you should be looking at within Compass and at what frequency? That's something is really, again, when we talk about being regular versus random, Steve leading the firm as a whole, there's things he's looking at weekly, things he looks at monthly. There's things as a leadership team we're looking at. Our managers, we have expectations, and so we hope that that's a helpful tool, and we look forward to getting that out to people soon.
One more question came in. Kyle, thank you. Will discounts be integrated or captured in Compass at any point in the future? Looking to see most discounted clients of our firm, or will realization only be calculated off write-ups and write-downs on client accounts? I do not know the answer to that question, but what I would like to do with that is pass that along to Dan Alstrup on our team, and I believe he will be able to address that more specifically, and we'll get the answer out on that for you.
Excellent.
You're welcome, Kyle. So I just said thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or comments today? Okay, well, again, Jana, Steve, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the everybody attending. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you today. We'll get that survey sent out. We will also send out a recording of the webinar today. And I just want to finally say thank you for your business. Thank you for attending. And as always, let your friends know about Compass. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.